Welcome to this panel discussion on union values and LGBTQ plus worker experiences. Our panelists will be discussing the results of a study of United Food and Commercial Workers in the United States and Canada. My name is Luann Good-Gingrich. I'm the director of the Global Labor Research Center at York University in Toronto. And first, before we begin, I invite us to acknowledge the traditional territories and their current treaty holders on which each of us resides. And today, since we're scattered across Canada, the US, and beyond, and our activities are shared digitally through the internet, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technology, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the work we do and make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. I invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, and especially our shared responsibility to make good of this time together, and for each of us to consider our roles as allies in reconciliation and decolonization. And this virtual land acknowledgement is adapted from an acknowledgement written by artist Adrian Wong. So thanks for joining us today. We're pleased to be collaborating with UFCW and the UCLA Labor Center in organizing this event. And I also want to thank our co-sponsors for this event, York's Center for Feminist Research, the Sexuality Studies Program, and the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies. So now I hand it over to Nick Moulet, a colleague here at York University. Nick is the coordinator of the Sexuality Studies Program in the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies, and also associate professor in the School of Social Work. So Nick will introduce the team and moderate the discussion, and will also provide some brief comments after the panel presentations before the Q&A. So Nick, I hand it to you.
Okay, I think I was muted there. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Luann, and welcome everyone. Thanks for taking an interest in what's going to be a very interesting and exciting panel that we have for you this evening. I want to just begin by thanking Professor Good-Gingrich, Director of the GLRC, and Hajer Merwali, Coordinator of the GLRC, for all their work in pulling together this webinar for this evening. Our focus is on the recently released report, Union Values and LGBTQ plus Worker Experiences, a survey of UFCW workers in the United States and Canada. This was a collaboration between UCLA Labor Center and Outreach, Union of Food and Commercial Workers, also known as UFCW, LGBTQ plus Labor and Allies, and this report was published and released in October of 2020. The report is a joint effort between labor activists in Canada and the US with great relevance to both countries. And for any of you that follow LGBTQ plus movement issues, there's a lot at play within these communities and in particular in the labor movement itself. And we'll be hearing more about that from our panelists this evening. And they include Michelle Kessler, who is chair of UFCW Outreach, Chair, International Union Federation LGBTQ Committee, Yana Shadak Hernandez, who is the director of the UCLA Labor Center, Sid Jordan, who is a PhD candidate in the UCLA Department of Social Welfare, Emmanuel Lopez, Human Rights, Equity, and Diversity Coordinator for UFCW Canada, and Jackie Graticola, board member, UFCW Outreach, union member, UFCW Local 400. So I turn it over to our panel at this point. They will give their presentations, and then I will return in the end with discussion and questions.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having us. Thanks for all of you for being here. And just so you know, this is actually our first time presenting this report. We have a whole bunch of Time's coming up and we're really thrilled our first time was with all of you. I'm Michelle Kessler. I'm an officer in my local union, the UFCW 1776, in the great state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, the state that put Joe Biden over the top in his election. But I'm also the chair of UFCW Outreach. You'll see our agenda for tonight, and it's a pretty busy one, so we're gonna get moving. Slide. We have our team. Some of them are here tonight. And I have to give a big kudos to the UCLA team, what amazing patience and professionalism in dealing and working with us. With us tonight, we have Sid Jordan, Yana Shada Hernandez, Shaba Wahid, Emmanuel Lopez Bassos, and Jackie Graticula. Next page. So about this study, but first let me tell you a little bit first about the UFCW Outreach, giving you some insight into our mission. UFCW Outreach tasks itself with ensuring full equality for LGBTQ workers on their jobs and in their unions, to build a labor environment that embraces diversity, encourages openness, and ensures safety and dignity. Outreach works to educate all UFCW leaders, staff, and members about LGBTQ communities, and to build support and solidarity for LGBTQ workers and all communities that share the union's common goals and interests. The group's mission is to build mutual support between the union's international, region, locals, and LGBT communities to organize for social and economic justice for all. So we're a constituency group in the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, 1.3 million workers strong. Most of our members are essential workers and have been on the front lines during this pandemic. We represent grocery workers, packing house workers, food processing workers, drugstore workers, nursing home workers, among many others. Our group was created in August of 2013, and it's significant for many of us to know that our union had our back was amazing. Myself, I started with the union in 1986, and it took me till 2013 when Outreach was formed to actually come out to my coworkers and to my members. Anyway, next slide, please. Oh, go back. I'm sorry. So I'm getting way ahead of myself on this one. So we did 1,004 surveys, rank and file members of our union, and also did interviews, and that data will be shared with you tonight. We had some really amazing key findings. One, the UFCW is fighting for LGBTQ rights and social justice. In other words, members support our work and the unions make a difference. In fact, next week, we're having a webinar, Why the UFCW Matters to LGBTQ Workers. 2, union contracts and educations protect and empower LGBTQ workers. 3, improving the workplace for LGBTQ workers requires cultural and systematic change. So anyway, in late 2018, 5 years after our creation, our executive board met. We wondered, what does our union need us to do? What do our members want us to focus on? Are we making an impact? What is the reality of LGBTQ workers in our work sites? We were lucky to be able to partner with the amazing UCLA Labor Center and spend 2 years designing a survey, analyzing results. We are extremely pleased of the outcome and the roadmap created for the next steps needed. We'll be talking about those tonight. Now I'm ready to go to my favorite page of all, the next page. We're going to do a survey. We're calling it an icebreaker, but we're just curious to see who we have on board tonight. So if you could, check the box, that's yours. And check as many that apply to you. Okay, hopefully we'll be getting some results.
I'm gonna stop sharing so they can see the results from the other screen. Just a second.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So maybe, Hajar, I know you might want to share the screen. Yeah.
Wow, these are great results. Okay. Somebody take a picture of that. That's awesome. So you're going to appreciate when you see our results too. Okay. 71%. That's amazing. And we're glad to see you all on board tonight. Okay. We can go to the next one. Okay. So we're going to give you a snapshot of LGBTQ workers and communities in the UFCW. And below that is one of our pride stickers. We try to make a pride sticker every year. Next slide. I love this slide as much as I love the slide that you all just did, the poll. So this was amazing to us. This was a game changer for us to find out of the 1,000 workers, over 1,000 workers that did our survey, 83% had family members or friends who are LGBTQ. 76% know coworkers who are LGBTQ. And of those who took the survey, 28% themselves identified as LGBTQ. And 9% identified as ITNB, which you'll hear that acronym a lot tonight. That's intersex, transgender, non-binary. And one of the great things about the UFCW is we're a very diverse union. In fact, we're considered the youngest union amongst all the unions because of all the young workers we represent, particularly in grocery stores. And also we're a union full of new immigrants that we're very proud of. Next slide. So to our left is the flyer that we used to publicize this survey. We also did palm cards. We were on social media. It says there the survey was through December 10th. We actually extended it a month. We offered prizes and drawings to encourage people. If you've never done the survey, it's hard to get people to do a survey, and it took a little bit longer than we had, but it turned out fantastic. You'll see our website address on the lower right. There, you can receive a full copy of our report on that site. You can either download it, or in the next week, we're actually going to have printed copies that we can send out to people. Just let us know through the website. Next. So this gives you a little bit of a flavor of who the participants were who filled out our surveys. And these numbers are actually pretty close to the actual makeup of our union. I would tell you that the number on the bottom, the 9% for packing and processing, is slightly lower than our actual number. And the number on the right, the 7% for medical cannabis, is a slightly higher, but pretty much just does reflect the makeup of our union. Slide. The geography of the participants who took this, as you can see, the Canadians were definitely overachievers with 33%. We're a little bit light in the south central part of Pennsylvania, or of the United States. I have to tell you, our membership is a little bit light in that area, and we're a little bit light in participants from northeastern United States. Not quite sure about that, but overall, I think that the participants who were involved with this really do reflect the geography of our union. And I'm really pleased to recognize Yana Shattuck Hernandez, the project director of UCLA Labor Center, who's been an awesome partner in this project. It's all yours.
Thank you, Michelle. And I also want to recognize my colleague Saba Wahid, who is the co-principal investigator on this project, and also, of course, Sid Jordan, who'll be presenting from our team, from our UCLA team. But this has been really a pleasure to be able to partner with a constituency group of one of the largest unions in our North American continent, and to do a first ever binational study for this kind of work. And so this is a cutting edge sort of first ever study, and we're very privileged as a Labor Center to be able to do that. I wanted to share just a little bit about the Labor Center and our sort of approach and our philosophy around research. We have a undergraduate program within the University of California, Los Angeles, and the first ever labor studies program for undergraduates. It's a major, it's the first major in our system in California. And we are part of a institute called the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment. And within that sits the UCLA Labor Center. A key part of our sort of tradition as a labor center that has been as a labor center, the Institute has been there for about 70 years, but we have been working as a labor center directly in the heart of the immigrant rights, worker rights community in MacArthur Park, for those of you who may know Los Angeles. And we also certainly have a campus at UCLA, and we have sites there for our classes. I am one of the researchers, along with Sava, who really think critically about the kind of research that we want to endeavor and engage in. And we espouse to a model called research justice, where we believe that a public university like UCLA belongs to the people, and that it should really advance quality education and employment for all. Our research is focused in this research justice approach, meaning that we believe that workers, students, family members, parents are actually the experts of their own reality and are part of our research journey. So we take great care in bringing a kind of process together, like in the case of this study with the UFCW, to have workers, board members, rank and file, leaders within the union all sort of engaged and conducting the research with us, analyzing the data, challenging the data. We've done gallery walks, we've presented the data to workers. They've been part of our process of actually telling us when they thought the data was perhaps not really clear or incorrect. And then we went back and we went through a whole other participatory process to really engage this team that you're meeting today, but also then others around how we frame that. And we've done that with many of these studies that you see up on this slide. With young workers, we do work with undocumented communities and families. We've been very much engaged in working with gig workers, ride-hailing drivers in this particular case, but in general with the gig economy. And a lot of studies, one here on Black workers in Los Angeles, but also really many times the voices of workers that are not privileged in the research agenda at a higher education institution. And so with that, I will say that it's also really part of our agenda to make sure that students are engaged in the research process, and not only graduate students, but also undergraduate students. So we frame all of our classes in that sort of voice and carrying that kind of agenda forward. And you can see below, also as Michelle, going to the outreach website or to our newsroom, you can see that this study has been posted there. And we've been able to shift also how a university like UCLA focuses on worker issues, which traditionally has not been the position of many of the universities that I have been part of. And so it's really a privilege to be able to do that. And I will now pass it on to my colleague and friend, Sid Jordan.
Thank you so much, Yana, and thank you, everybody. I just had to say what an amazing opportunity I had as a PhD student to be able to work with the UCLA Labor Center and the commitments that the researchers and organizers there have to this real, genuine practice of research, justice-oriented work in the world. It was an amazing gift to get to learn from skilled people at the Labor Center, but also to be able to meet my friends now at UFCW and also have a very true exchange of skills. I think sometimes when researchers partner with community members, that piece gets lost. And I just want to recognize here how much I learned from working also with the amazing labor organizers that I got to work with as part of this project. My role today is also exciting. I get to walk through a little bit of the report, the methods that we used, and talk about it in this first slide. It says creating a tool for action, and it's sort of, I wanted to start there and say as we thought about the methods, as we thought about the questions, as we thought about the analysis, this sort of underlying assumption that we are creating research in order to inspire action, in order to move towards a more socially and economically and racially and gender justice world. That was on our minds the whole way. So all the choices we made were really influenced by that. You can go to the next slide. I think, Michelle, you covered a lot of ground about who we talk to and how we talk to people. So I just have a few, as I hope to kind of orient people who might, after this, read the report. I just am going to cover a few more things about sort of our sample, our participants, if you will, for the researchers and everybody on board. So our survey was done online. Like Michelle said, we had over 1,000 people participate, and the survey itself was designed to be also a bit of an educational and outreach tool. So not just for the purpose of collecting data, but also as a way to help people who would be taking it, like, learn about outreach and maybe think about ways that they could get engaged in different ways. So that was also part of our process of creating the survey that we could talk about if people are interested in that. And then with the interviews that we did, that was also an opportunity for outreach board members to do one-on-one interviews. We did a training for those members to do interviews with rank and file members, and that was also a relationship building opportunity as much as it was about collecting really important in-depth stories that could really accompany some of the statistics that are in the report. So in terms of, participation, thank you, well timed. I thought, because the first slide just said Canada, 30%, and as a Canadian, I felt like responsible to also, give you a little more in-depth look at who are in there. So this is just a breakdown by province and territory. We definitely had a large percentage of participation in Ontario, where we had Emma really doing so much background work and outreach too, and just great participation there. And then you can see the rest of the breakdown. A lot of BC and Saskatchewan were the largest percentage of other participants. The survey was translated, in case people are interested, in both French and Spanish, though we didn't have that many participants who took the survey in French, unfortunately. All right, so Michelle mentioned this about our use of terminology, but I was asked to just clarify this too, because we had to pick kind of acronyms, which are always kind of like imperfect and wrong, no matter which way. But this is the way that we did it. We asked people, if they identified as intersex, transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming, and if they said yes to that, they're grouped in our report as IT and B. And this is just a little breakdown of those 9%, how people wrote in, and it was a open-ended question what they wrote in. So we actually had quite a few people who wrote in non-binary, gender fluid. Almost half of those wrote in something like that, with the rest writing in some other terms. You can go to the next slide, because we also asked people, do you identify as LGBTQ? And that was a separate question. So you'll sometimes see that separate in the report, and sometimes you'll see it combined. And this just has a breakdown of what people who said, yes, I identify as LGBTQ, said in terms of their sexual orientation or identity. And just to make the point there at the bottom, you'll see that there are people in that group who identified as straight or heterosexual. There's not a binary relationship here between LGBTQ people and not. We have trans people who might identify as straight or heterosexual, for example. And we also have people who didn't say they identify as LGBTQ, but later said that they are bisexual or asexual, or another term that wasn't straight. Just an important note to make, I think, when we're thinking about these categories, which are challenging to get in terms of a survey. You can go to the next slide. I just wanted to say, in the back of the report, you can look at the breakdown and comparison between LGBTQ and non-LGBTQ participants on other kind of demographics that we collected. And so that's just a snapshot of where you can find that, and we can talk about that if there's questions. And then the next slide where we saw some significant differences between LGBTQ I and B participants and not were around age. So LGBTQ participants were generally younger and had less time in the union. So there's a graphic there that shows that where the non-LGBTQ participants, 43% of those had 15 or more years in the union, which is a really long time and kind of is important to how we might think about some of the findings in terms of leadership development opportunities and sort of power, positions of power within the union and the workplace. All right, so I think I get to present, yeah, I do. I get to present the first finding, and then I'm going to pass it on to Emma. The first finding of the report is titled UFCW is Fighting for LGBT Rights and Social Justice. And from the beginning, this was an important question that we entered the research with and that we wanted to think about how could we document what we know about what UFCW has been doing to fight for LGBT rights, and how might we use research to sort of investigate how rank and file members are thinking about and feeling about that work. So that's the focus of the first section of the report. And then the first piece of it, we actually did kind of do a bit of it wasn't a full audit or something of all the political work that UFCW has been doing, but it was important to kind of think through all the ways that locals have been taking action on the ground. So there's a list of some of the more recent examples of that, and I put a few up on this slide just to think about the ways that union organizers are doing coalition work with LGBTQ groups and also working both for proactive legislation and also against sort of repressive and oppositional legislation in their regions. So that's sort of like the political frame. And then one thing that the interviews, I think, let us look at is the ways in which sort of everyday work of union organizing also is influencing conditions for workers and also the union itself. So this was just such a wonderful quote that that sort of, I think, demonstrated that. I wanted to draw attention to it. It was one of the Canadian healthcare workers who was talking about being involved with collective bargaining. And she said, we're all queer on the team. Our first negotiating committee was all women, we're all queer. And so it's like, obviously that's going to get in there. And then this really important point, she finished that off with, we educated the union a lot. So we wanted to see how LGBTQ people and union leaders were really doing that education work. And how that impacts workers' rights. We asked participants in the survey, how much do you agree that your union is taking action on LGBTQ workers' issues? And found, at least for our sample, that many agreed that was happening. And they also agreed that it should be happening more. So that first question is, yes, it's happening. And then, yes, we think it should be happening. Union leaders need to be supporting this. And also they agreed that with political candidates, LGBTQ people should be considered. We also wanted to sort of look at what might be politically motivating for LGBTQ people to get involved with union political activities. And so there's a discussion about that in the report, but a graphic here, and I'll just point out that LGBT people were not only saying it would motivate them to get involved if the union was supporting a pro-LGBTQ candidate, but they were also more likely if their union was supporting pro-union candidates. And also that they would be motivated by joining an outreach chapter, which was something that we wanted to kind of test the theory about in this study. You can go on to the next one, Yana. And this is just one more quote where one of our participants was kind of talking about why would it matter to them for pro-LGBTQ candidates to be part of the piece for them that would be important to feeling connected to their union. And so they said, you know, we genuinely support people who are good with workers' rights, but it would be wonderful if pro-LGBTQ would be considered also. If your representative doesn't see you for who you are, how can they represent you accurately? I think that's, yeah, okay. And then I'm going to pass it on because I think my time's up, but I'll just say one other piece of this was to look at Pride Festival participation, because that's a major way that local unions have committed resources and time to doing something sort of publicly visible on behalf of LGBTQ workers. And so we were eager to find out if people were participating in that, if they knew if their local had a contingent, which about a third of the sample said yes, and whether people were participating in their contingents. And then I think the very last slide was asking members what their priorities would be for outreach and other people in the union trying to take action for LGBTQ workers. And just mentioned there that Pride was on there, but it wasn't a top one. That visibility is important, and there's a lot of other very important work that people had in mind. And I think the next two findings of this report really speak to those strategies as well that are on the next piece. So I'll pass it on to, yeah, I think we'll pass it on, and then we can talk about implications of that one altogether, I think. Thanks, Jana.
I think it's my turn next. All right, yes. We're at the halfway point of this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Sid, for providing such great findings to finding one. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much, GLRC Global Labor Center, for hosting this webinar today and having the opportunity to carry out this work with the UCLA Labor Center alongside UFCW Outreach leadership. I know one thing, the goal remains a journey, not a sprint. It's something I have to remind myself of because there's a lot of work to do, a lot of inequities that require nothing short of change. So I first want to situate my comments from where I join you today, which is Toronto, Ontario, the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, homeland since time immemorial, to the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Attawandaron, the Métis people. Building solidarity with LGBTQ workers requires societies to clearly catch up. And so in the union, as much as we can pat ourselves on the back for a job well done when it comes to representing union members through tough discrimination-based grievances, I cannot confidently say that workplace protections for LGBTQ workers are always provided uniformly across the US and Canada, or that they meet the standards of the Platinum Rule, which is treat people, others, the way that they need to be treated, they want to be treated. However, evidence shows us that these protections are far more likely to be present in unionized environments than in non-unionized environments. So, as Michelle mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, the creation of the founding of Outreach at the International Convention in 2013 signaled a more structured and strategic LGBTQ binational initiatives, which is where we are now. You know, this started off with a needs assessment. We need to know where our members are, what their needs are binationally, and there's just so much gratitude for where we've landed with UCLA by our side. This takes me to the report's second main finding, which is there's power in collective bargaining. In fact, it's the most powerful resource or tool that union members have in ensuring or securing workplace protections. Regardless of company policies, we know that if we negotiate language that holds employers accountable, should the company violate any human rights ground, any collective bargaining language, we know we have a case and we can enact a grievance procedure. It's arguably the #1 reason workers join unions. In Canada, union density is around 30%. However, one stat I recently saw showed that approximately 62% of workers remain closeted in the workplace. So in this study, the majority of participants supported collective bargaining for these protections, though nearly 1/3 of members surveyed said that they were unsure where they stood, suggesting that a good portion of union members are uninformed about LGBTQ equity issues. The study also showed that 68%, as you can see on the yellow dot there, of LGBTQ workers feel protected because of their union contract. So again, there is work to do, but I want to take a moment to focus on the 87% of workers who support collective bargaining for these protections. To that extent, early in our work following the founding of UFCW Outreach, we recognize that LGBTQ issues are not a monolith. So ensuring protections for the, in means acknowledging diversity in LGBTQ issues and LGBTQ identities. We also saw the grave injustices and assaults that continue to be done against trans lives. According to research cited by EGAL's National Action Plan in 2020, 49% of trans Canadians earn $15,000 per year, approximately. The finding in our report also shows that ITNB workers fare the worst when it comes to experiencing discrimination on the job, but the effects of discrimination are scaffolded in Canada. So by way of example, in 2015, in 2017, and in 2018, we worked with CPAT, the Canadian Professional Association for Trans Health, to research the extent to which provinces and territories provided gender-affirming care through our healthcare system. So while there has been some improvement across the country, too many people, as you know, endure extensive wait times in accessing gender-affirming care, are forced to pay out of pocket, are forced to work jobs in with any marginal benefits to support this care. So as a union, we know that attention must be paid to company benefits to get rid of healthcare exclusions which don't extend these protections. So to this extent, our UFCW International Convention, we passed a unanimous resolution to refuse healthcare exclusion and policies that discriminate against trans lives. So this leads us to the next takeaway, which is that protections are meaningful when they're explicit. By naming it in our Constitution and by calling out the fact that every local union needs to prioritize this as part of their bargaining renewals or first contracts, we also showed solidarity with union reps in that convention who maybe aren't out, who maybe want to include this component in their bargaining unit and aren't sure how to do it. So this slide, responding to anti-LGBTQ discrimination, we learned a lot. Aside from the fact that there are various ways in which members are seeking supports once they experience discrimination at work, through this diagram, we also see that there's a pathway to improving how we represent, and better yet, how represented our members feel. As you see, 66% talk to coworkers, 29% talk to union reps. But training works. Training is important. Training is vital because it fosters workplace culture where union members can speak up, where they can be more than bystanders when they see discrimination in front of them or experience it themselves at work. Why? Because through training, they can name the discrimination, they can call it out, and they can use different ways to intervene safely and advocate for the person at risk. But we also recognize that it's a two-pronged approach. It has to be, because even when the members equipped with these tools, without the support of a well-trained union rep or union staff, their grievance or issue may not get resolved. So we learned that it's not enough to assume that just because you're a union or labor advocate, it also means that you're equipped with the tools to fight LGBTQ discrimination. And as you can see on this slide, the study indicates how life-changing the training we provide can be for LGBTQ folks, but particularly for non-LGBTQ folks and union reps. Because as the quote that Sid ended with, you can't be what you can't see. 35% received LGBTQ training at the workplace. Unionized folks who received training through their union were far, far more likely to be able to call it out in the workplace. That is what we learned, a big takeaway from this study. So here's another quote. Survey participants who had received training were more informed about LGBTQ protections in their CBAs and supportive of CBAs to secure those protections. They demonstrated greater awareness and responsiveness to anti-LGBTQ discrimination at work, and they were more likely to talk to their representative when they saw it. Now, a little bit more on Canada, because I'm Canada, I'm Toronto, Ontario, that's where I'm speaking to you from. As you know, it was significant, the level of discrimination that LGBTQ folks faced in the workplace. So while we've made some gains with the passing of Bill C-16, gender identity and gender expression and sexual orientation continue to be left out of the Employment Equity Act. And research shows that 75% of trans people have no documentation to reflect their gender, which also points to two more barriers. One, which is in accessing employment, and the other one in misgendering and discrimination that is far more likely to arise from work environments where an LGBTQ lens is not applied in company-wide measures. As union reps, we have an opportunity to hold companies accountable, particularly in the not so visible microaggressions that too many survey respondents talked about in this survey. And I would encourage you to think about the 68% of cases where in this survey, LGBTQ workers spoke to a coworker about their harassment. This is where training, both through formalized programs and through educational campaigns, can really make a difference on how workplace colleagues can react to support LGBTQ ITNB workers on the job. So for example, over the past year nationally, we've called on the federal government at UFCW Canada to end the practice of conversion therapy, which is still being practiced to date across this country, and for which there is absolutely no repercussions to date for organizations found doing it. So this takes me to my next point. We need you. These are pathways, these are recommendations, but we can't do it alone. We need the research of organizations like the UCLA, like the GLRC Labor Center to inform and without prejudice, challenge this, test the societal bias through anonymous surveys and through your educated analysis. We need to also support, wherever we're coming at this from, support allies and encourage workplace actions that entail talking and working through these issues with management, especially on discrimination cases where the union reps support. Lastly, we need to lobby if we're going to push for positive changes that will support safety in the workplace. Why? Because it literally impacts the cards we will hold in our hands at the bargaining table. And until we turn adversity to a celebration of diversity, it'll remain a struggle. In UFCW Outreach, we've created a ton of resources to prioritize non-discrimination language. So I encourage you to go to the UFCW Outreach website and check those out, or to the UFCW Canada/social justice website to check those out. Now, I'd like to wrap up this section by pointing the importance of working from an intersectional approach. Whenever we think about equity issues, the relationship to each other and our relationship to each other at work and beyond. To that extent, I'm closing with a comment made by one survey participant who identifies as a trans woman with a physical disability and whose testimony in the interview described the importance of using an intersectional approach and framework in our work to advance LGBTQ rights. The quote says, "We've got actually quite a few people with mental health issues. We've got a few people with physical disabilities, none as major as mine. But when you're trying to deal with a shoulder that gives you problems, that's still a big thing in a grocery store. I'd love to see our union start looking at those intersections." With that, I will close and pass it on to Michelle Kessler for finding number 3. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Emma. You rocked it as usual. So I'm doing key finding number 3, improving the workplace for LGBTQ plus workers requires cultural and systematic change. In other words, you got to work it. And just that sticker is one of our most recent outreach stickers. If you like it, you can get it for free on our website slide. So this is so true about how do we make change? And I'll just give you a couple examples from my own local union. Last summer, we added gender identity and gender expression to a non-discrimination clause in a union contract at a shoe plant in Northern Appalachia. After the vote, a member came up to the union reps and came out as trans for the first time and thanked us for including them. When we posted this survey, a bisexual member came up to us, seeing the flyer, and offered to be interviewed. Last July, a grocery member came out as trans to their union rep, knowing how visible we've been on LGBTQ issues. The union rep called me, not sure what to do or say. He wanted to do the right thing. 6 weeks later, we had a training for all staff, including administrative staff, from Dr. Eli Green at the Transgender Training Institute, to better prepare our staff to be better advocates. Our actions need to be deliberate. In fact, on February 17th, I'm proud to say Outreach is sponsoring Dr. Eli Green to do a training for all UFCW staff across US and Canada on trans issues, so we are better at our jobs. So this first slide that we have here, when you first look at it, you're like, hey, union staff wins the race, right? 77% believe their union staff are very accepting. And they also said that somewhat accepting is the rest, and we're only 3% said not accepting. So in some ways, we looked at this as a victory, right? Because this could have been an ugly slide. If we could go back to that slide. Yes, there we go. But having said that, we see the room for improvement, but you see below us, including customers, the number is terrible. I would tell you the numbers for ITNB workers who were surveyed show actually much lower numbers in terms of how they felt everybody including, which I was stunned, management, ITMB workers thought only 21% were very accepting, and in fact, 23% non-accepting. And the numbers for customers were absolutely dreadful for how ITMB members have been treated by customers. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area, not only amongst our ranks, certainly keeping managers and coworkers understanding, but also customers in general. Slide. This page pretty much speaks for itself, letting us know how much discrimination we've witnessed in the workplace. The one thing we thought was interesting was how non-LGBTQ workers saw significantly less discrimination. And we're taking this as an opportunity to perhaps provide educational trainings so that people can better identify LGBTQ discrimination, so that we can improve that slide that Emma was showing earlier about people not pursuing these issues. Slide. Some of the things that our survey participants said that they witnessed: 43% negative comments, stereotypes, and jokes, 35% being referred to by the wrong pronoun. I would tell you amongst the ITMB participants, 58% were deliberately wrong pronoun used. And obviously those are things we need to fix. And the list goes on, unfortunately, of other things that have been witnessed. Slide. For us, safety at work is everything. That's the whole advantage of having a union contract. It's what we do. My God, during this pandemic, you have no idea, 7 days a week working on the safe at work. But this is interesting and alarming. At least once, these workers at these percentages felt unsafe at work. We need to work at that. I would tell you a part of the research report that's not included in this presentation tonight is we have a section on advocating for gender neutral bathrooms, which we do think is an important priority that we need to work on. Slide. So participants out at work, 49% workers are out at work, and that's to most people or to everyone. 22% are out to some people, and 29% out to few or no one. The numbers for ITMB workers is much worse. You'll see the 33% are out at work, but 49% are not out to either few or to no one. And on the right is a list of the reasons, why that is. And obviously we believe an indicator of an inclusive workplace for LGBTQ people is they need to feel comfortable with their coworkers, to know what their identity is, what their relationships are, what their families are about. You need to be able to bring your full self at work. And as somebody who spent so many years in the closet, I can tell you it's so liberating. And that's obviously one of our big goals here at the UFCW Outreach, so that our members can feel that they can be themselves at work, but also to work for better communities. And I really have the big pleasure to introduce my friend and comrade, Jackie Particula from Ottawa, Canada.
Hello, everyone. I'm from 1006A local. As a worker and a member of Outreach, it's been a privilege in becoming also a rep. So I have been benefit to be in all the spectrums of supporting members, my co-workers, and as a professional as well as a rep. So 30 years I have been able to witness the changes and improvements along the way. For me, when I become a full-time person in my workplace, I was very afraid to come out and to extend the benefit to my partner. So I have my union rep information right on hand and away to HR, and make sure that I will ask the right questions, and hopefully I will get the support that I needed in case there was a negative outcome for that. The result was the yes, I was protected, and so is my partner. But with that my journey started having the ability to intervene where we have situations that arouse in any moment that could have been very negative, and turn it around and have a educational moment to speak it, to change somebody's perceptions and how we treat somebody else different and not different to us. So that gave me the ability to say, okay, navigate from one area to the area and have the importance where the union through via trainings for stewards, training for the reps are so important. I have reps that at one time when we're trying to implement the constituency outreach, we wanted to have members. They came to me and said, I know I have members that are the part of the community, but I don't know how to initiate the conversation. So I took the opportunity to say the conversation has to be clear, positive, embracing, without judgment, and just straightforward. And if it's somebody who is transgendering or changing, to ask what you will be your pronouns that you prefer. So those are to change the barriers that people have because they have lack of language and the support to where the resources to get educated and how to support their members as well. So I had that opportunity. One of my latest, I will say, positive note that I experienced is just recently, this Saturday, I have a member who was transitioning, but was not upfront from work. And they give the opportunity and a huddle to actually introduce her as transitioning with a new name and the support that all the members in the store had, as well as the management and the union. So, and it would just give it that environment that was safe enough for that individual to actually embrace her changings. So when we tend to go about just the pathway towards social justice, we need to have the participation and pride that makes it to be visible, the education, the pamphlets, the buttons, all those things that we do and how we advertise or promote within the workplace and in the society at large. It makes us to be that we're present and we have a pivotal point to embrace our community, to empower our community, and to save our communities. So that's always been very relevant why unions are necessary in our workplace in this society today, because we still have a lot to change and a lot to improve in general. So that makes a interesting opportunity. And with this survey, it has helped us to narrow certain areas and multiple areas we can actually explore and exploitate and have more trainings based on what we have in this findings. So this is my now Q&A questions. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists. I really appreciate each of your presentations. It was quite informative and gives our attendees some insight into the importance of this report. I think what comes forward in what all of you are talking about is that, you know, we're now at a place in time where LGBTQ people are far more public than we've been than in past times. And work settings in the United States and in Canada are very diversified settings. I mean, we all have to work to live and to eat and pay our bills. And so being diversified settings, we have an obligation to ensure that everyone feels included, accepted for who they are, and valued as a worker in that setting. And if there are things that are happening in work settings that are transphobic, homophobic, heterosexist or cisgenderist, anything along those lines, it can really devalue that worker and not have them reach their full potential as a worker. And I think that really comes through in this report, and I really appreciate all the work that has gone into it. I do open it up now to questions, and the way to do this, if everyone, especially the attendees, if you pass your cursor over your screen, you'll see an icon at the bottom. For my screen, it's the last icon that states Q&A. If you click on that, you can enter your question there, and then I could read it out, and then it would be up to the panelists who will respond to that. Now, I know there is one there already, and I don't know if they were responded to individually But I think I'll just share it with everyone just to, for everyone's benefit, and then the panelists can respond. This is actually a series of questions in this, so bear with me as I go through it. Was there any cross-comparison research comparing the perception of titles as accepting versus the perception of subordinates or authorities as accepting? Did the study examine the effect of that power-structured relationship on how people perceive others' level of acceptance? Did the survey ask people to identify whether they were union staff, manager, or worker? If someone could respond to that.
I could take a first go at the last question. I wish I had said it in the beginning, so thank you for asking it. The survey was not actually for union staff members. In fact, we screened out union staff members from taking the survey, and I'll let, if any of the outreach folks want to comment on that decision, that might be interesting, but just in terms of who's in that survey, it's not union staff. It's all rank and file workers.
Did anyone else want to add to that?
Right. I think Sid nailed it. I think our goal was to get input from our, rank and file members who are, on the work floor. And we thought it was interesting. One, we differentiated. We wanted to know, what do you think of your union reps, right? Because it reflects on us, right? We were very relieved we came in first, right? But it was interesting to us. We wanted to know what they thought of their management, because really we own some of that too. If they have management that, need some adjusting, we need to be there advocating on their behalf. We also were interested to know, because in particular in the grocery and retail industry, we're really seeing an uptick in the past few years about issues with customers. It's really quite sad to know that people have to fear going to work because of customers. And I don't know if it's something, and I see one of these questions, the US, Canada, and it would be interesting to know, in the past few years, if this situation has gotten a little bit worse, because quite frankly, we have national leaders in our country, certainly, flaming the homophobic and transphobic, prior to Joe Biden. And we do believe that there is an uptick. One of the things we didn't talk about more in depth in the report was the commentary from folks that, in fact, that they've seen an improvement in their union reps in their union over the last 10 years, which we embrace that, obviously. But as Emma said, we still believe we have more to do. But we did want to do a report card on how people thought about their managers for that very reason, where we need to do additional work. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that was an important piece for us.
And Michelle, you kind of moved into the second question that's posted, and I'll still state it anyway so that everyone is aware of it, and others can also provide a response to it. Are there differences between US and Canadian respondents? Is the union in Canada more accepting than that of the US? What are the advantages of cross-country collaborations?
Well, us folks in the US always think you guys have a utopia in Canada. So we feel that on a lot of these issues, you've been a couple steps ahead of us for sure. And then, of course, we maybe made some regression within our country, but we've admired the work that's been going on in Canada, and we try to copycat and emulate that as much as possible. But I'll let the folks from Canada respond to that.
I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Nick, on that in terms of where things are at. I think that Canada is patchy. I think it's ad hoc when it comes to LGBTQI legislation. And I think that we must, there's a reason why I brought up Bill C-16 and the Employment Equity Act and employment barriers for trans workers, because I think that on its face, Bill C-16 appears to give us like a heck of a lot, and yet these problems continue happening, right? And so I think that this survey was really, really quite demonstrative of how uniquely positioned the union is to bargain a superior level of protections for persons who unionize, for workers who are frontline workers right now through this pandemic and are experiencing particularly further marginalizations and economic disparities, and how important it is for us to join forces. Locals are unique oftentimes, in their ways of addressing LGBTQI rights and LGBTQI inclusion. So I think that one thing is true, despite our differences in legislation and maybe our methods, I think Canadian workers and American workers really believe that that they were able to exercise their voice in very similar ways cross nationally. And I'd be interested to hear if UCLA also found the same thing, like if there were any discrepancies between both countries, because I feel like, it could have been either or, despite the fact that when we did this survey, the Babcock decision had not happened yet. Pardon me, Sid, please.
No, that's just fine. I think we actually did run a lot of comparisons because we certainly were curious going in whether we would see them. And these are sort of very big comparisons. It's Canada versus US, which doesn't let us look at a lot of that nuance we would really need to look at, but that's what we got. And we didn't see hardly anything. There was very little to dig around there. I think it is because of the diversity of where we were, the geographic diversity for sure of where folks were coming from. I do actually think we saw something unexpected a little bit, that we saw both similar numbers of people witnessing or observing discrimination in places that had protective legislation and in places that didn't. And maybe even actually more kinds of observations of discrimination in places that we maybe didn't expect, California, for example, and Ontario. So to kind of bust some myths, to not see differences, some of those differences that I think people assumed we might see.
I don't know. I know, Emma, you had mentioned Yana. Did you want to say anything in response to that?
No, I would concur with Sid. I said we did look and we were really trying to make some of those comparisons and we didn't quite see it. Obviously, I think there's, as all research, room for really digging deeper. I see some of the questions about will we move forward with more research on looking at, more maybe local membership and sort of really kind of trying to explore these nuances that Sid mentions, in more depth. Mm-hmm. At this point, we're trying to get this study off the ground and launched and do that. But I do know that part of and even what Jackie had said, part of this report is not just this question of the research and the data, but it's to use it as a tool for action, as Sid so eloquently talked about in the beginning, so that this report will be published and handed out to many folks, as well as accessible on the website. We're doing that the same with our networks in California with UFCW, with students and with LGBTQ plus groups, to really share how this is the first sort of example where unions are seriously, investigating this issue, trying to be critical of themselves as a union and not, just patting themselves on the back, but being critical and wanting to see how we can do this. And as somebody who, is teaching labor studies, this is always the question we get is, how does union serve me? Well, we know the collective bargaining, we know that there's education, but this study is really to share how this can be part of a gender equity, civil rights, human rights agenda that really reaches, and really we all have to be in a workplace, and we need to change the way our workplaces function and the cultures of those workplaces. So I do think it's important to get to the nitty gritty, and we hope to maybe do that next. So maybe if this team wants to do another 2 years together, we could think about it. But maybe Jackie, you'd want to answer like some of the things about, there's a question here about, yeah, just, the tools for equity and how that can play out in local member, locals and with membership.
So when we talk about tools, when we have days of observance and we take those opportunities to educate, to say, okay, today is Pink Day and what that means and all that kind of stuff at the workplace. Also, at times, the even management will reach, or even HR, to say, I have this situation, how we can address this, how we can do this, how we can protect our members. So it's always a conversation, it's always evolving, it's always something different that we never saw, or because it's so vast. So it gives us opportunity every single time to have that conversation. So the more conversation that we have, the better language that we have, the better collective agreements that we put and enforce it, and have the members to know that they have something to go about, that will it makes a big difference to the members in general. I don't know if I also see if any of the other question.
Yeah, there is another one, but before we go there, I just want to pick up on Emma's comment as well, in terms of my take on this, especially in Canada. I mean, that's partly why I laughed when Canada is seen as utopian. Believe me, we're far from it. And what I love about our country is that we, as much as we have much that we're happy about and we praise, we don't stop pushing, we don't stop working to make it better, because many of us, if we consider ourselves progressives, we recognize that there's so much more that we can be doing and so much more that we can do to improve. On Emma's point, I totally agree. It's patchy here. As good as it looks from the outside, when you're on the inside, it is quite patchy. I had this discussion just recently with some of the faculty association members I work with here at York University, and some of the struggles we face in terms of it's almost like an off balance of frameworks that we're working with. Again, from the outside, Canada's human rights legislation looks really impressive. And yet many of us in more progressive settings, such as in labor unions, we've gone beyond the kind of equality framework of human rights, right? For example, I'm not sure if this is the case in the United States, but in Canada, we're using EDI, so equity, diversity, and inclusion. One could claim it's a buzzword, it's just the latest model or what have you, but it's a way of getting beyond just equality and looking at equity across the board and all the diversity and the intersections that we all carry, right? And so it's interesting just to kind of, again, provide a little bit of evidence with what Emma presented. She mentioned, we have employment equity legislation in this country that does not include LGBTQ people, right? We have 4 designated groups, but LGBTQ people are not one of them. And yet we have human rights legislation in this country that protects sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. So there's an inconsistency there. And it's an example of how government can fall behind what's really happening on the ground, which is, really where labor unions find themselves. And we're the nitty-gritty on the front lines doing the work, and we know what we're experiencing, and we bring that forward. And I just want to take a moment to advocate how important labor voices are in the human rights fight in any country, for that matter. And so having that progressive voice at the labor front can influence human rights legislation. So I just thought I'd point that out so that Canada doesn't come off as so progressive, right? Okay, I believe we've covered a couple of the questions. There is one here that's I can read. Thanks for this work. It was incredibly helpful for me as I am delving into a very small Master of Arts study at SFU. That's in Vancouver, Canada. That's the Simon Fraser University. on LGBTQ2S+ advocacy perceptions at the BCGEU. I'm also trying to capture intersectionality in the experiences of members, staff, and leadership within the union. And one of the challenges I've come across in placing LGBTQ caucus and committees was the role of these identity-specific union caucuses and committees covered in your research. So that was the question, sorry. Caucuses and committees, was the role of these identity-specific union caucuses and committees covered in your research? Did people speak to committees being places of support and or tokenism? And if I'm understanding this question right, we sometimes do see this in union settings where committees and caucuses get struck, like a women's caucus, a disabilities caucus, an LGBTQ caucus, a race and ethnicity caucus. Did any of this come up in your research, the existence of these caucuses and their intersectionality? And experiences of tokenism is part of this question as well.
I think maybe this question requires a researcher's answer as well as maybe outreach. So it wasn't our intent this was not about measuring the union values of union representatives, staff paid positions across the US and Canada, and outreach chapters which get set up, which get created across the US and Canada, form voluntary type of positions and desires of union members looking to participate in pride, build gender sexuality alliances in the workplace, run an advocacy campaign on pronouns. So not necessarily caucuses. And what was beautiful about the study is that it was anonymous, online, with rank and file members, right? And so that being said, I think that's all I can say about that. I leave it with the researchers.
Go ahead, Sid. Yeah.
I would say there were a few questions we asked that sort of do investigate the role of outreach. One, do people know about it? Do people think that that should be a priority moving forward to build out these chapters? Would that be a reason you might get involved with the political activities of your members, which was one of the pieces on my slide. But there is a little bit, I suppose, that asks members to reflect on whether these kinds of strategies are valuable, whether they want to engage in them. And certainly when we did our interviews, I remember quite a few people talking about sort of the role of getting connected to outreach as one of the ways they even felt involved with the union at all, and sort of the difference that that made. I think we also, maybe encountered some people who hadn't even, hadn't had a chance to connect to outreach, or maybe didn't really think that that would be important for them too. So certainly both those things were present. I think another investigation, sort of like the role of tokenism within the union. I mean, we talked a lot about whether we wanted to do more assessment within the union, and I think that might be an interesting direction for sure.
There is, well, before I go to the next question, was there anyone else who wanted to respond to that?
I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but the executive board of outreach and our members of outreach are actually, so this idea of tokenism, they're from a very diverse group. We have folks, we have new immigrants, Latinos, folks who are Asian. I mean, we have our own diversity, African American, Black. So I don't know. I think our diversity is actually part of the beauty of outreach, because as we know, LGBTQ folks are everywhere. So
I also want to just do a little bit of this has me thinking historically, a little bit of a shout out to those very brave and courageous LGBTQ workers who came together and formed caucuses and formed committees within their unions, and were the first to do so. I'm I'm going to age myself here and say that I remember that, when we first heard about such a committee or such a caucus in unions here in Canada, such as CUPE and OPSU, that was a big deal. Like, I remember, like, just everyone was like, you could do that. You're not getting in trouble. They're not threatening to fire you. They're not going to demote you. Like, and it was groundbreaking. It was really pioneering work that they were doing. And it was, it's a sector of not only society, but our lives, that in the workplace, they were taking up these issues, and it was the first time. So I think I just want to do just a little bit of a shout out about that we shouldn't lose sight of that in terms of the growth of the movement and what the sector has contributed to it. So there's a couple more here that I'm seeing. This next person states, getting over 1,000 responses for a non-mandatory survey is amazing. Congrats. Out of curiosity, what rough percentage of the total membership does that represent? I ask just as a reference for my own union when we undertake a similar initiative, and they thank you as well.
I don't know, go ahead, Sid, but I know that, Michelle, you had said it's what is it, the members of UFCW? 1.3 million. So yeah, we've got 1,000 across so you can do that math. So of course, but we did really try to, represent all the regions. I mean, and certainly we extended our survey and really tried to delve more into like the Southeast, which is also challenging for money levels. One, as Michelle also said, because of representation and the density there is less, but so our, we were very excited as well. 1,000 surveys in general. We do a lot of surveys at the Labor Center for different sectors. This is one of, a very large union, but to get 1,000 surveys, and we did have to, and Sid can speak to, the cleaning of this and how many we had to actually not, we weren't able to include in our results because of, just our criteria. But anyway, that's what I could say. I don't know, Sid, if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I think that answered the question.
Okay. Again, I encourage participants to post their questions in the Q&A section. You'll find that icon at the bottom of your screen.
And I would just say, Nick, if anyone on the participants who are doing studies or interested in our methodology or are seeing our survey instrument, certainly in the report, there's an appendix, you can look at all that. We'd be happy to meet with you or just talk through our process, what we did. I mean, it was a long, how to keep a online survey tight enough, focused enough, and make sure that that people don't get fatigued by the end and not finish. So we did a lot of piloting and we did a lot of thinking through this. So we'd be happy to meet with folks. And I will just say that I think, as we are in this pandemic and thinking about just seeing how, of course, this union in particular has been so impacted. These are our frontline grocery workers, meat packers, retail workers, drugstore workers, cannabis workers, the people we rely on every day for so much. And I would agree, like when I came to Los Angeles, Nick, I mean, the lavender caucuses of some of the unions, they were so brave and so amazing that I was able to participate with. And then Outreach has sort of come on and been one of the strongest constituency groups now in the union labor movement that I see and that we see in labor studies. So I would say again that it's really critical to think about how we can use this as a tool for education and for actually, one of the questions said, mobilizing new members. And for those of us who are seeing, union density decreasing and membership decreasing historically over time, that, new analysis and researchers looking at this, that there is an uptick. And for younger
workers wanting we've done other stuff with younger workers who are really interested in joining unions, who want to learn more about unions, who want to understand how their rights can be protected in an ever more precarious gig service economy that really sees them as dispensable and invisible. So that's, I think, yeah, what I'll say.
Thank you, Yana. Thank you for extending that opportunity for people to be in touch around the methods. There's a really interesting question, or a couple of questions here I just want to share with everyone. Thank you so much for this presentation. Are there any ideas for how to address and resist discrimination from customers? Are there ways for unions to address this issue through collective bargaining? And as you were mentioning before, and a number of you represent people working on the front lines with the public and with customers. In Canada, we've got this thing, I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, where this kind of theory that the customer is always right, that can be really hard to deal with. So I'm not sure if someone would like to respond to that.
I do know some UFCW locals. In fact, I think some of them are in Canada, have negotiated language on these customers' issues and the rights of the workers in these situations. And if that person's interested, I could certainly send them a copy of some of that language. I want to say it is that the idea, I think, actually originated in Canada, but we're starting to try to move on that here in the United States more often. And I think this survey further documents the need for this idea that the customer is always right. We have a lot of work to do in this area to protect our members.
In one of our collective agreement do have a little bit of language on the members should not be subject to discrimination and bullying by the customers or people from the public. So that is a very difficult situation, because a lot of time that's perhaps will happen when there's not a lot of people around, or the discrimination will be very subtle and in many ways. So until you hear that, or you see that, or the members approach you, you try to resolve those issues, it's very difficult, because it's usually by the time you're trying to intervene, the customer is gone, the time has passed. Usually they come back to you the next day and say, I was in shock. So it is very difficult at times to intervene when that's happened. So it always rely to management to say, well, when something like this happened, call immediately, because we need to address that. But it's very difficult because it's very transit, it's very fast situation, and a lot of time, because they don't want to be seen in the floor or arguing, they will be left alone, or nothing happens. So it's very difficult, and it's very judgmental for the members that are subject to that. So I can attest for that it's always a need for continue that kind of work.
Pardon me, but I think that finding number 3 on the need to build cultural and systemic change, like this type of question hits it right on the nose, that oppression is multi-layered. So we're talking about institutional oppression, systemic oppression, individual oppression, and all those levels there. I mean, that's where the customer feels like they have the power over the worker in the workplace. So what are we talking about? Are we just talking about LGBTQI, homophobia, heterosexism, or are we talking about more than that? Like classism, racism, xenophobia, however it might show up, because it is. And so that's why training is embedded on each of these findings. Because if we train all stakeholders, workplace parties, then there's less of a chance of ambiguity when it comes to those moments where there's that face-to-face interaction with the customer, because nobody can say, I'm just going to be a bystander. No, nobody has that that excuse, right? Because when you're trained, you've got information. And so now the expectation is to do better. Once you know better, do better, right? So anyway.
I also love you drawing attention to the multiple levels too, because I think sometimes this really gets reduced to how do we respond when something happens, or how do we train people to have the right words or the right language, instead of really thinking about oppression as a system of hierarchies that's operating all the time around us. So I think one of the exciting things about trying to frame, even though we were talking about some of the individual level treatment and trying to document that, framing that as a cultural issue. So not just teaching people to respond when something happens, but setting a tone for a workplace. So when something happens, people feel like their coworkers have their back, that they know who to talk to, that everybody's kind of upset about it, and not just this individual experience that happened. And yes, that this is happening on multiple levels of oppression that are intersecting. And yeah, the more that the whole team can be a part of creating the culture that doesn't, invite those kind of customers in, how important that is, and how long haul work that is. That's not something that will be done in a one-time training, right?
We have just a couple more questions, and we are coming to the end of our time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine them just so that we cover them. The first is, would love to hear how you rolled it out, meaning the study, and what method worked best: email, social media, etc. Would you speak to the way you rolled it out? So that's one part. And then the other question, so we don't lose out on this, is this person's wondering if representation is an issue that surfaced in the survey findings, or is it more in the realm of harassment and general treatment? So people can give thought to those two, and maybe if we can get some quick responses, and then we can wrap up.
A little bit of the just methods, and it was a collaborative team effort. There were flyers. I mean, I think our UFCW folks, we sent that out. We had that link. There was a lot of posting of that at the locals, in many different forums where outreach was present. They had trained folks on how to encourage people to take the survey. We kept sending emails and connecting with that outreach board. We actually had a mini training that looked at some of the data, and we wanted to get more data. And then those folks helped to get some of that out. I don't know, Sid, if you want to add a little, or maybe Michelle and Emma and Jackie, who all participated in trying to get out the word.
For Title 6As, we took the opportunity to have our a stewards conference, which are a lot of their activists, and we have also special guests that were not part of stewards, but they were interested to be associated with outreach. So during that time, I took the opportunity to promote the survey and have several computers available and guide them to do between breaks and all that kind of stuff to get that people. And then after where we finished, they all took their surveys with them with the queue and how to go around, so they could get people at the workplace and every stores or place of work, that somebody will be able to fill those up. And besides the promotion that we did to social media, posters, everything else, and the reps as well. So that's how we did in Title 6A.
Okay, I think that covers all the questions. I once again want to extend a big thank you to all our panelists for their outstanding work, not only in the research of this report, but for all your ongoing work on LGBTQ+ issues in the labor sector and in the labor movement. I also once again would like to thank Professor Good Gingrich, Director of the GLRC, Hajar Merwali, Coordinator of the GLRC, for all their work in pulling this webinar together tonight. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies, the Sexuality Studies Program, and the Center for Feminist Research. And I would also like to thank all of you who attended tonight and participated in this webinar. It's encouraging to see your interest and to have you involved with your questions. And I saw also from many of the comments, many of you are doing research in this area, and that too is very encouraging as well. So once again, a big thank you to everyone. It was great meeting all the panelists. And I hope we cross paths again in the future. And I wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nick, and everyone. That was wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
the
Luan and
opportunity.
HI. Yeah.
Stay safe, everybody.
Yes.
Please,
Likewise.
please do.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And what a great way to, begin really thinking deeper on next steps and maybe collaboration with all of you on another study.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good. Good night, everyone.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone. Good night.